Hello everyone and welcome to another Commander Tactics Deck Tech. My name's Pope. Today's video will be another installment in the $10 Deck Tech series. This series is all about building complete Commander decks on a very tight budget. The decks that will be showcased in the series are meant to be fully functional, focused on a set theme, but also very fun and flavorful. Whether you're a brand new player looking for an intro deck or a seasoned veteran looking to change things up within your playgroup, these decks can get wins all without breaking the bank. Today's deck, minus the basic lands, can be purchased in its entirety for only $9.99 from TCGPlayer through its cart optimization. The commander of this deck is the mana cheatin' human wizard Jodah Archmage Eternal. For one generic, a blue, a red, and a white, Jodah is a 4/3 flyer that reads, "You may pay Wooburg, so white, blue, black, red, green, rather than pay the cost for spells you cast." This 5-color deck is focused on playing big spells for only 5 mana. The recipe for this deck can be broken down into 3 simple steps. Step 1 of our plan is to get out all the mana we can and ensure that we have the right colors to keep big casts coming. A quick note here about our mana base. For the sake of this deck tech and to stay within budget, we are running a mix of only basics. But if you do have access to multicolored lands like gates or anything like that, and you want to make this deck just a tiny bit more efficient, I would suggest adding those in and you'll be all set. But moving on to step 2 of this deck, we are going to cheat out some big, beefy spells that are going to have big impacts on the field and hopefully even bigger impacts on our opponent's lives. And step 3 is to play spells that are going to help us do it all again by enabling us to recur out our big spells, get the most out of our creatures, and double down on things like ETB effects and death triggers. And of course, as stated earlier, all of this deck can be purchased for under $10. So without any further ado, let's take a look at the spells that are going to help us ramp it up and cheat out all those haymakers, kicking things off with Beanstalk Giant, Borderland Explorer, and Centaur Nurturer. Beanstalk Giant, coming straight out of a Throne of Eldraine, has an adventure that says search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Then later on we can cast this big boy for 6 and a green, and his power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. Borderland Explorer says whenever he enters the battlefield, each player may discard a card, and each player who does gets to search their library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Although not technically ramped, this is going to help us ensure we get the colors we need to cheat in those big spells. And then Centaur Nurturer says whenever Centaur Nurturer enters the battlefield, we're going to gain 3 life, and we can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. Right out of the gate with this deck, you are going to notice that a lot of our ramp spells will have dual effects. So not only are they going to help us get the lands we need or bring them out on the battlefield, but if we need to use them for other things in different situations, they can help us do that as well. Next up, we got Coiling Oracle, Spring Bloom Druid, and Elvish Rejuvenator. Coiling Oracle, a 1/1 for a green and a blue, says whenever it enters the battlefield, we're going to reveal the top card of our library, and if it's a land, we get to put it straight onto the battlefield. Otherwise, this is going to let us just draw a card. Spring Bloom Druid, straight out of Modern Horizons, whenever it enters the battlefield, we're going to sacrifice one of our other lands, and then when we do, we get to search up 2 basics, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Effects like these are going to make sure that we have the right colors when we need them to use Jodah's effect. And then we have Elvish Rejuvenator that says whenever it enters the battlefield, we're going to look at the top 5 cards of our library, we're going to put a land from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and then put the rest onto the bottom of our library in any order. Later in the deck tech, we'll be taking a look at a couple cards that we can also use to abuse these ETB effects and double down and maybe get a 3-peat off of them if possible. And then we have a few sorceries that are going to help us get the colors that we need with Open the Gates, Search for Tomorrow, and Urban Evolution. Open the Gates just let us search our library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into our hand, and then shuffle our library. If you do run gates instead of basics, you can get a gate off of this as well. Search for Tomorrow, we can suspend 2 for 1 green, so on turn 1 we could play this, and it says search our library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle our library. Whether it's turn 1 when we suspend it or turn 3 when we hardcast it, Search for Tomorrow, just a great ramp card. And then Urban Evolution, a 5 mana ramp spell, says we're going to draw 3 cards, and then we can play an additional land this turn. Ideally, we are going to ramp by turn 4, cast Urban Evolution on turn 4, and get us to 6 mana, 7 mana going into turn 5. Next up, our enchantment arsenal of ramp comes in as Bounty of the Luxa, Kalani Heart Expedition, and Urban Utopia. Bounty of Luxa is a pretty neat enchantment that I've always been fond of, and it says at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, so main phase 1, we're going to remove all the counters from Bounty of Luxa, and if no counters were removed this way, we're going to put a counter on it and draw a card. But if there was one that we removed, we get to add a colorless, a green, and a blue to our mana pool. After only 2 rotations of the table, Bounty of the Luxa definitely gets its value back. Kalani Heart Expedition is an enchantment for 1 green that says landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a quest counter on it, and then we can remove 3 quest counters from Kalani Heart Expedition to search our library for 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tap, and shuffle our library. Kalani Heart Expedition is only one of several cards in this deck that run landfall, and with all these spells that are going to help us ramp out lands, we will be getting these landfall triggers time and time again. And then Urban Utopia for 1 green, we're going to enchant one of our lands, and whenever this card enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card, so it replaces itself, and the enchanted land we can tap for any color to help us get out of those situations where we might be missing just 1 or 2 colors. And then rounding out our ramp package, we have Death Sprout, Hera, and Fire Mind Vessel. Death Sprout says destroy target creature, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle your library. A great removal spell that is not only going to enable us to get rid of those big threats on the board, but also allow us to ramp out any colors we might be missing. Hero says as an additional cost to cast the spell, we're going to sacrifice one of our lands, but then we get a search for 2, put them onto the battlefield, shuffle, and Firemind Vessel, an artifact for 4 mana, comes in tapped, but we can tap it for any 2 different colors. But now that we've got all of our mana online and we are ready to go, let's take a look at all the spells that we're going to be cheating out using Jodah's incredible ability, starting with Desolation Twin, Artisan of Kozilek, Eldrazi Devastator, and Ulamog's Crusher. These Eldrazi with extremely high casting costs coming down on turn 5 can really make a huge impact on the board and set your opponents back quickly. Desolation Twin, when we cast it, we're going to get a 10-10, but also create a second 10-10. Artisan of Kozilek lets us return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield when we cast it, but also has Annihilator 2. If we're able to annihilate some of our opponent's permanents on only turn 5 or turn 6, this can be a huge setback. Eldrazi Devastator is just a big beefy trampler for 8 mana and 8/9 body, and Ulamog's Crusher has Annihilator 2 and 8/8 and is forced to attack each combat if able. Next up, we have 2 big giant worm brothers, Palaka Worm and Sifter Worm. Palaka Worm says whenever he enters the battlefield, we're going to gain 7 life, and whenever Palaka Worm dies, we're going to get to draw a card. And of course, he has Trample. And then Sifter Worm, Trample as well, and whenever he enters the battlefield, we're going to get to Scry 3. Then reveal the top card of our library and gain life equal to that card's converted mana cost. As you can imagine, we're running a lot of high 7, 8, 9 CMC cards, so we're going to be able to gain a ton of life off of these 2 cards. And that life gain is not only important to keep us going in the game, but also relevant to a hidden win condition I've added that we'll take a look at a little bit later. Then we have the most expensive card in this deck, Rampaging Baloth and Orin Reef Hydra. I really wanted to make Rampaging Baloths work in this deck, because as we're ramping out lands early, the effect might fall off, but with Rampaging Baloths, if we're able to ramp out 2-3 lands a turn, we can create a ton of 4/4 creatures and swing in for big damage. An Orin Reef Hydra, a Hydra for 4, 2 green, says trample. Whenever a land is going to enter the battlefield under our control, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on it, and if the land happens to be a forest, we get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Both these can make big impacts if we're going to be swinging out trying to kill our opponents. And then in an unintentional turn of events, we have 3 7 CMC creatures, Sandstone Oracle, Blood Tyrant, and Meteor Golem. Sandstone Oracle lets us refill our hand. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we get to choose an opponent, and if that player has more cards in our hand than we do, we get to draw cards equal to the difference. Blood Tyrant, a flying trampler, says at the beginning of our upkeep, each player is going to lose a life. Then we get to put a +1/+1 counter on Blood Tyrant for each life lost this way, so ideally we're putting 3 counters on each of our upkeep, and then whenever a player actually loses the game, we get to put 5 more +1/+1 counters on Blood Tyrant. On the first turn in which Blood Tyrant can attack, he will most likely be an 8/8 flying trampler, which is something that is extremely hard to deal with. And then we have Meteor Golem, just another removal spell on a body that says whenever Meteor Golem enters the battlefield, we can destroy any non-land permanent an opponent controls. Usually paying 7 mana for Meteor Golem feels pretty bad, but with Jodah we can pay only 5, destroy a non-land permanent, and get our 3/3 body on the field. Our board wipes in this deck are a little situational because we don't need to be spending cheap mana. We can spend exactly 5 mana for those big removal spells. That's why we run Disaster Radius, Dune Blast, and Volcanic Visions. Disaster Radius has an additional cost to cast a spell. We get to reveal a creature card from our hand. Disaster Radius is going to deal X damage to each creature your opponents control, where X is that card's converted mana cost. The great thing about Disaster Radius is that it is not going to hit our creatures at all, and there's a good chance we can board wipe the entire board, revealing a 7 or 8 CMC creature. If things get out of control though, we have Dune Blast that says choose up to 1 creature, destroy the rest. If we don't have any on the board, we don't have to choose any, we can just destroy them all. Or if we have Jodah online, we can keep him around and destroy everything else. And then Volcanic Vision lets us return a target instant or sorcery card from our graveyard to our hand. Volcanic Vision is going to deal damage equal to that card's CMC to each creature your opponents control again. So these cards all are one-sided board wipes for only 5 mana, which is absolutely crazy value. And to round out our big monstrous spells, we have a few cards that are going to help us draw additional cards to keep the train rolling. Nissa's Revelation, Interpret the Signs, and Treasure Cruise. Nissa's Revelation says we're going to scry 5. That is a lot of cards to go through and ensure we get the one we need, but then we're going to reveal the top card of our library. If it's a creature card, we not only get to draw cards equal to its power, but we also gain life equal to its toughness. For only 5 mana, we get to set up our draw a ton of cards, and gain a ton of life. Interpret the Signs for 5 and a blue says scry 3, then we reveal the top card of our library. We're going to draw cards equal to that card's converted mana cost. If we're able to get a big Eldrazi on top, this is going to help us to keep our hand full and keep things going. And lastly, Treasure Cruise has Delve, so we can exile cards out of our graveyard if we want to only pay the 1 blue, which is most likely what we'll do. But if we don't have a graveyard to do that, we can pay 5 mana to draw us 3 more cards. In the off chance that we've ramped out all of our mana, we've cast our big beaters, and we still haven't won the game, let's take a look at some of the cards that are going to keep our momentum going and not let us run out of gas. Starting with Rescue from the Underworld, All Sun's Dawn, and Restock. For 4 and a black, Rescue from the Underworld says as an additional cost to cast Rescue from the Underworld, we're going to sacrifice a creature. Then we're going to choose target creature card in our graveyard and return both of them to the battlefield under our control at the beginning of our next upkeep. If Jodah is about to get removed, or if a board wipe's about to come down, we can cast this and have 2 big bodies on the field at the start of our next turn. All Sun's Dawn may be one of the most powerful cards in this whole deck. For 4 and a green, for each color we can return up to 1 target card of that color from the graveyard to our hand. Late game, All Sun's Dawn is going to allow us to basically refill our entire hand with 5 answers or threats, whatever we need at the time. And then Restock simply says return 2 target cards from our graveyard to our hand. And it is important to note that each of these spells do exile themselves upon resolution, so we can't abuse them and use them on one another. Next, we have a few supporting creatures assisting with all of our big ETBs. Gravedigger, when it comes in, it's going to let us return a creature card from our graveyard to our hand. Fierce Empath, whenever it comes into the battlefield, we're going to get to search our library for a creature card with converted mana cost 6 or greater, reveal it, and put it in our hand. There's a ton of these, and a lot of them can really end games. And then Mist Meadow Witch, for only 2 mana, says we can pay 4, 2, a white and a blue, exile a target creature, and return that creature to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. With all of our incredible ETBs, Mist Meadow Witch we can use multiple times because she doesn't have to tap, and repeat all those powerful abilities over and over again. Then we have 2 more supporting creatures, Wildfire Eternal and Crashing Drawbridge. Wildfire Eternal for 4 mana, 3 in a red, has Afflict 4, so if this creature gets blocked, we get to deal 4 damage to the defending player. And whenever it attacks and isn't blocked, we can cast an instant or sorcery out of our hand without paying its mana cost. As you've seen, we've got some big 7, 8 CMC spells, so we want to be able to cast those instants, those sorceries, And then Crashing Drawbridge, a new card out of Throne of Eldraine. I think this card is extremely unique, offering a 0/4 body early on to protect us against any aggro damage we might be facing, but it also is going to allow us to tap it, and our creatures are going to gain haste until the end of turn. And it's not one creature, it's all of them. So if we have Crashing Drawbridge out late game and we cheat in a bunch of big boys, maybe, I don't know, 2 10/10s, we can tap this Drawbridge and get in for monstrous amounts of damage. Then we've got a few spells that are going to help us protect our squad. Curator's Ward, Acrobatic Maneuvers, and Negate. Curator's Ward is an enchantment aura for 2 and a blue that says enchant permanent. The enchanted permanent has hexproof, and whenever it leaves the battlefield, the enchanted permanent, if it was a historic, we get to draw 2 cards. We're most likely going to be using this on Jodah, as he is our real engine, and without him, our deck can't do a whole lot. Acrobatic Maneuver is an instant. We can exile a creature we control, then return it to the battlefield under our control, and we get to draw a card. So if we aren't able to keep Jodah safe and it gets targeted with a removal, we can use this, keep him safe for the turn, and draw a card. And lastly, Negate. I toss this in here. It's a great counter spell in case anything is used to take Jodah out, or for board wipes for our army. We want to make sure we are prioritizing the right targets with this, keeping all of our forces safe. And rounding out the deck, we have one of my new favorite cards coming out of Throne of Eldraine, Happily Ever After, and then we have Plane-Wide Celebration to complement it. Happily Ever After, for 2 and a white, we get to cast this enchantment. It says, whenever it enters the battlefield, each player is going to gain 5 life and draw a card. But the real juice of this card is in the next text. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 5 colors among permanents you control, there are 6 or more card types among permanents you control and or cards in your graveyard, and your life total is greater than or equal to the starting life total, you win the game. With all the permanents and colors we have in this deck, Happily Ever After can possibly go off. That's also why we are running all that additional life gain. And the sidekick to Happily Ever After is Plane-Wide Celebration. For only 5 mana with Jodah, we can cast this sorcery. Choose 4, we can choose the same mode more than once. Create a 2/2 citizen token that is all colors. Return target permanent card from our graveyard to our hand, proliferate, or gain 4 life. I was definitely inspired to add this combo into the deck after seeing so many people talking about it online and around the Magic community, but even if we're not able to pull it off, Plane-Wide Celebration by itself can do a lot of work. Now that we've broken down this 5-color Eldrazi Fiesta, let's take a look at what else is inside the 99. For removal and control, we have 5 targeted removal spells and 3 board clears, in addition to 4 or 5 other removal effects and abilities such as Annihilator. Our card draw comes in the forms of just about every type of spell and gives us a total of about 9 to 10 total ways that we're going to recoup the cards in our hands. The ramp in this deck is by far one of the shining features, with more than 13 spells to ensure we have the right mana when we need it. Also, many of these spells have added effects to make them practical late game as well. And to win with this deck is pretty straightforward. We're going to ramp and draw as much as possible to allow us to keep putting out big threats using Jodah's ability and have some monster combat steps. And maybe, just maybe, if we weren't able to win with those big creatures, we can bring out the secret weapon that is Happily Ever After. Jodah's an absolute beast with a really fun ability built in. Casting 9 and 10 CMC spells on turn 5 will surely have your opponents losing their mind and scrambling to find answers. By far one of the most challenging decks that I've ever built, but one that can definitely compete and do some crazy things along the way. Hey, if you enjoyed this deck tech, make sure you hit that like button. It lets us know that the videos we are producing are what you enjoy. And if you want to know when our next deck tech goes live, make sure you subscribe. If you're a Twitter user, head on over there and shoot us a follow at EDH Tactics. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you guys for the next one.